Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder with Jenna Blum of Mighty Blaze, and we started the Blaze the day of lockdown because we were noticing that authors' tours, like mine, were being canceled, independent bookstores' doors were being shuttered, and readers were left no real way to, talk to the authors they love, and authors had no real way to talk to the writers they loved. So we started a Mighty Blaze, just the two of us, two yoga women in sweatpants. And now the Blaze is approaching its fourth year, and we have 37 passionate volunteers, and we're so grateful to all the people who have supported us and all the authors who have come to talk to us. It's just been a wonderful thing. So a few housekeeping things before I introduce our amazing guest, and I'm so excited. If you look at the chat on the right, you will see a link so that we really want you to buy your books at an indie bookstore. And this link for bookshop.org can help you find that. I've also got all sorts of goodies up there about our guest, and I'm going to introduce her right now. This book, The Most, is The Most by Jessica Anthony. I was telling Jessica before we got on here that this book got to me really early. And as soon as I looked at it, I thought, oh my God, this looks like something I want to read. And I have become totally obsessed with this book. And I'm actually not the only one who's so upset. The Washington Post has called it spare and elegant. NPR raved that it's a superb novel about marriage at its breaking point. It's just gotten raves from just about everyone, and rightly so. So first I want to welcome Jessica Anthony. I'm just like beside myself that you're here. I loved your book and I can't wait to talk to you. And thank you so, so much for being here.
Oh, Carolyn, thank you. It's wonderful to be here on A Mighty Blaze. This is very exciting. Thank you.
You are so welcome. The novel unfolds over the course of one day, and yet, like people as Walt Whitman says, it contains multitudes. So it's also set in the 1950s, where the book just perfectly captures it, which we'll talk about later. But first, I want to know, why did you decide to structure the book like this, which is perfect? And why a novella other than a novel, although this book is certainly rich enough to be one? There's so many things to talk about.
So this book actually started as one of a collection of 3 novellas that I wrote. I wrote them pretty much from 2015 through 2018. And when I sent these 3 novellas to my agent, he said, yeah, Jess, these are really interesting stories, but, do they belong together, And so I had a sort of sad moment. I was sitting in the parking lot of like a Dairy Joy up in Maine, and I had a lot of self-doubt and sadness in that moment. And then I had a great conversation with a writer friend of mine who said, take one, make it a short novel and see what happens. And so that ended up being my last novel, Enter the Aardvark, which was published in March of 2020. And so The Most was the second. And so then when I finished my work on Enter the Aardvark, I went back to The Most, and I was, meditating on it over the pandemic. I was thinking about, whether or not this could be a standalone fiction. And I decided to edit it and work on it. And here we are, in 2024, and the book has just come out, and it's hugely exciting. And so it's my impetus for the length really was to fulfill my own vision for what I felt a novella was. And part of it is my own personal interest in the form. Many people, I think, mistake the novella to be merely a matter of length, but it's my belief that there are other kind of common aspects of novellas. Like it really feels as though you belong to the oral tradition, as though you're sitting down next to someone who's about to tell you a long tale, And so structurally, are you asking about the time, sort of how the fiction is built?
Yeah, I was just wondering because it's the plot is deceptively simple and entrancing. It's a 1950s housewife takes to her swimming pool and she won't come out. And this is a time when everything appears to be booming on the surface, but there's a kind of disappointment, especially among women. And it's also about Kathleen husband Virgil, who has his own disappointments.
Mm.
And it's kind of like, when you throw a pebble into a pool or a lake, all the rings sort of space out and move out. And that, for me, I thought, well, that's a really interesting and perfect structure for a book about, how do we stay married? How do we stay true to what we want? What happens to our dreams? So I was just wondering, when you were first thinking of this idea, did you think like that you were going to set it out over the course of one day?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I knew from the get-go that I had a very short amount of time for there to be a dramatic escalation. This was just my overarching ambition, although I had no idea what that escalation would be. So I wrote the first draft of this story while I was guarding a bridge in Slovakia.
That was my next question. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I was living in this little town called Štúrovo, Slovakia, and my job was to guard a bridge that had been destroyed in World War I. Then the Nazis destroyed it again in World War II, and it was left unbuilt for 60 years. And then when they finally rebuilt the bridge in the fall of 2001, they installed an artist in residence there for 3 months at a time. There's someone guarding the bridge right now as we are speaking, to guard the bridge through the act of creation, through the act of art making against further fascism. So long as someone is guarding the bridge and making art, the bridge will stay intact. Like that is their philosophy. So the word most in Slovak and Czech, it means bridge. And so, when I was there, I knew that I'd been teaching a course on women writers of the 1950s, and I knew that I thought I might want to walk into that cliche of the 50s housewife. And it's a fairly risky thing to do because we have so many, I think, mythologies that circumnavigate about what the 50s were, who in particular 50s women were, and God help me, the 50s housewife. So,
Right.
It was just a really hot week when I was starting this book, and I went swimming a lot. They had these swimming pools in Štúrovo. So I went to these Slovakian swimming pools and they were empty. And I went into the water and I just sort of stayed there to cool myself off. And then I started thinking about Kathleen, and I got out and I went home and I wrote the opening line, Kathleen Beckett awoke feeling poorly.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. I completely forgot to tell your bio, so I'm going to do that now. Jessica Anthony is an American novelist and author of The Convalescent, Chopsticks, and Enter the Aardvark. In addition to writing, Anthony has held a series of diverse occupations across the globe. That's my next question, ranging from a butcher in Sitka, Alaska, an unlicensed masseuse in Poland, and a secretary in San Francisco, California. You have to tell us about these jobs. How did you become a butcher and an unlicensed? That's the funny part, that you were unlicensed masseuse in Poland. I want to hear about those jobs and how does it impact your art?
Oh, I love that you're asking me this question. I mean, I actually had something like 27 jobs before I was 30. I moved around a lot, and I just, anytime an opportunity came my way that I thought would be an interesting thing to do, or, slash, if I really needed the money, I would just take a job. I went out to Alaska because I wanted to go out on the fishing boats. I heard that you could make a lot of money, like, on the halibut boats, but I arrived too late for halibut season, and black cod didn't start for another month. And so I had to get another job, and I ended up working at this tiny little convenience store called C Mart, where I, worked the meat counter, and I also rented videos. And there's nothing more humbling than, hearing your name be called over an intercom, that there's like a yogurt cleanup that needs to happen or something. But yeah, I taught English overseas. I taught English in Poland, and I taught English in Prague for a while. And when I was in Poland, the masseuse thing happened because when I arrived, it turned out that I was actually being paid a lot less money than I thought. And so I couldn't, I had to feed myself.
Right.
And so I started just giving, I was affiliated with the summer camp, and I started giving like massages to people. And so people would pay me for massages.
Did you know how to do that?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I mean, but I was not but again, not licensed. Absolutely no business charging, American tourists for massages. I mean, that was insane. But yeah, somehow it worked out. Yeah, I was like a singing telegram gal in upstate New York for a while.
Which kind? Which kind of singing telegram? What was your outfit?
I was a cowgirl.
Oh God.
I sang that song "Surrey with a Fringe on Top" and delivered people's presents.
That is fabulous. That is fabulous.
Listen, I mean, we all did our things, and we all had our 20s. Yeah. Those were my 20s. But then, I found my way, really into writing. I was writing all this time, but I felt like I was wandering as a writer too. I was trying to figure out what kind of stories I wanted to tell. Really, like, I spoke English, but I didn't know my own language, if that makes sense. I was really trying to figure out, what words made sense to me. I was doing a lot of reading of Eastern European writers. One of my favorite writers is the Czech novelist Bohumil Hrabal, and just learning how other, writers overseas were telling tales. I've always been interested in sort of hyperbole, and the most, it flirts with this this moment between plausibility and irrationality and absurdity. So I think in my own way, I'm sort of testing myself in this book, like how close you can get to irrationality. And that speaks to the structure too. You had mentioned the structure earlier. So it opens with Kathleen. Virgil is departing for church, but he's seeing that Kathleen sort of is staying back, and he wonders if she's pregnant. He doesn't know what's going on with her. She doesn't feel well. And then the family comes home, and she's gotten into the swimming pool. And then when chapter 2 begins, we rewind time, and we begin with Kathleen starting her day. And the entire story is structured with these destabilizing elements of time, which really kept me on my toes as a writer. Right. And I think creates this kind of ambiguous feeling as a reader. You're not 100% sure always when we are, which I think lends itself to this escalation, this deepening problem of not getting out of the pool. Yeah.
Yeah. A lot of times it was almost like floating in a pool, where you sort of feel like you disassociate. So there's also a sense of the larger world, in particular Sputnik 2, and the dog who's inside that tin can floating around and burning up. I thought that was, it's so cruel, and yet it resonates against Kathleen's own feeling of entrapment. And of course, it's really hot where Kathleen is, and the dog also is burning up. Did you know that the detail was always going to be there, or did that just sort of come up? I thought it was because that was a really big deal when it happened. And it was so interesting that she was hooked on that and thinking about that dog, which in a way is thinking about herself.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, absolutely. Everything you're saying is something that I was feeling as I was writing. I really try to shy away from, metaphor that feels too obvious. I mean, I think that I landed on November 3rd, Sunday, November 3rd is the day that the novel takes place. And to be perfectly frank, I just did a little bit of historical research, and lo and behold, it was the day that Sputnik 2 was launched into space.
That's great.
So it just happened to be that the day that Kathleen went into the pool, by circumstance, was the same day that the Russians sent the dog up. And so, part of my ambition for thinking about Kathleen as sort of a 50s woman, a woman of her time, she's not an activist. She's she's like a champion tennis player who's found herself no longer playing tennis. But, if you read a lot of the work of women who were writing in the 50s and thinking about that particular role of the housewife, they were all exercising in their own kind of, subversive way, like a slight or an act, a way of pushing back against this incredibly powerful system that was just
Right.
really pressing down on them. But, they're also just human beings. They're trying to get through their day. So Kathleen's resistance and her feminism and her agency is not to try to like tear apart the system. It's simply
Right.
to exercise what little power she possesses, and she's going to do it by the end of this book. She's going to
Right.
push back in her way, right?
Yep.
And so the thinking about Laika, this dog up in space, is like, that is, I'm thinking back about what it must have been like for people in 1957, where the space race has just begun. And
Right.
President Eisenhower, is trying to downplay it and not raise people's fears. I mean, there's a lot of fear about what this now meant, that the Russians could do this. And so what does it now mean that there's a dog in space?
Right.
And this is the second space flight, and there's a dog. That choice just felt crazy to me.
Yeah, because a dog is domesticated. You think of family, wife, kids, dog.
And so, Laika was a little Moscow street dog that was just randomly selected. And there were a number of space dogs the Russians sent up. But yeah, I was just fascinated by the complete absurdity of sending this little dog into space, in this particular year, in this particular month that my two characters were living in. Like, what did it mean for them that that across the world, this dog was now in flight? So it's less, at least in my mind, it was less an obvious metaphor of Kathleen's own entrapment, although I love that parallel, than it was just sort of the absurdity of Kathleen staying in the swimming pool and the absurdity of this dog in outer space. So like the implausibility of it, I think, was the thing that really captivated my interest.
It's also a story world detail, it like creates this rich atmosphere. So I want to talk about Kathleen's past as a tennis pro. There's so many broken dreams and terrible trade-offs that these people think they're powerless to fix. Kathleen used to be a tennis star, but that success didn't happen. But then she admits the real reason it didn't happen. She doesn't want to lose. And as soon as I read that, I felt an electric shock because I thought, oh, that's a whole different thing. That's really interesting. And I'd like for you to talk about that in terms of Kathleen's character, because it's so fascinating to me that's what, because I would have thought, originally I thought, oh, well, she wants to be a tennis star because she'll get fame, she'll get adulation, she gets to wear those little tennis outfits and have the tennis pro, but that's not the reason for her. You made it very specific to who she is.
Yeah, that's right. Well, Virgil Beckett is a very handsome man.
Right.
I mean, I guess the kids nowadays would like call him a real snack, and so, she is completely surprised when he starts paying attention to her. She grew up in a family that was very cold to her. She got almost no, affection from either parent, but certainly not from her father. And I think she's startled by this extraordinarily beautiful person, this beautiful man suddenly paying attention to her and wanting to be with her. And it kind of, I think that single encounter when they first meet in the audio room of the college library, she plays it down, but it kind of, in my opinion, sort of shook her a bit. She's already, well underway, winning all of these intercollegiate championships. She has fantasies of becoming the next Margaret Osborne DuPont, who was, the tennis star, the female tennis star of Kathleen's time. And she likely could have done it. She's got this extraordinary talent. But Virgil Beckett is this beautiful interference in her life. And his presence, at least from my perspective, it's sort of like getting the trophy without having to earn it.
Right.
And so she's given an opportunity to quit tennis. She's given kind of an excuse out, and she chooses it. Right. And that's something that I don't know, I think is very familiar to all of us, maybe in
Right.
particular to women, when faced, because we have so many moments of adversity and challenge, trying to kind of achieve in a world that has been created largely for men. And so when given an opportunity to step aside and say, I couldn't do it, there was a reason why I couldn't do it. Right. I mean, it's a tempting moment. And,
Right.
she, in that particular moment, she made a choice, and she's now 9 years later recollecting and thinking back on that decision, and she's wondering some new things about herself, and so this moment of Kathleen in the pool, she's facing some lies that she's been telling herself about this marriage, but also about her own self-knowledge. She's
Right.
coming to terms with the fact that, like, maybe she has not fully known herself as well, and that to me also was a surprise and a delight to realize that this is a character in pursuit of something deeper than just trying to fix something, or even win, right? Like, she knows she can win with Virgil. She knows how to play Virgil. And so she's going to push him to a moment where neither one of them can really win.
That's right. I want to talk about Virgil too, because he's a really complex person. I mean, yeah, he's very on surface. He's handsome. You think he's a success, but he's not. He moved down there because he thought he'd have a better job, and he's an insurance salesman, which, very unromantic job. He thought he was going to have more money, but instead things seem worse for him, and he has to sort of choose like what facade he's going to show to the world. Can you talk a little bit about Virgil and how you formulated his character? Because like he was just fascinating too.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I probably see more of myself in Virgil. Speaking of all these different jobs that I've had, that's a little bit of my personality. Like, I will allow myself to kind of stumble into things and just do them because they're in front of me, and that is very much the way that Virgil has lived his life. Virgil also has the benefit of being the only man in a family of sisters, and so they have taken care of him after their mother passed away when he was young. He has had sort of an overbearing father. He got away from his father, and is now 9 years later feeling a little bit of an obligation to go and take care of his father, who maybe isn't doing so well. But, Virgil went overseas to fight in World War II.
Right.
And because it's Virgil, the battle he's supposed to fight never materialized. And he ends up in Naples, and he's just flirting with the nurses and hanging out. And he like twists his ankle on some cobblestones. And so he's like crutching around Naples. And so that's how he goes to World War II, and then, he comes home and he still has those crutches. He's gotten a lot of female attention from it. And so he's like crutching around the University of Delaware, right? And and Kathleen calls him on it, but he very much wants to be with people who will just take care of things for him. And it's how he stumbled into his job in insurance. He was hired largely because of his looks, and the consequence of that choice is that you find yourself to be a person who is very easily manipulated by others, right? They're just going to use you for what they want.
Right.
So, Virgil is lazy. Virgil is lucky. He has this horrendously obscene fantasy of becoming Charlie Parker. He's really obsessed with Charlie Parker, because he saw him one time and he thinks, oh, I can play the saxophone. I'm going to do that one day. And it's kind of driven him, but he's never even picked up the instrument. So, he's living some delusion as well about, who he is and what he can be and what he can do. And I think we all have a moment, when we arrive into our adulthood, where our fantasies are presented to us as fantasies, and you begin to realize the limitations of the choices that you've made. And so Virgil is arriving at that kind of a moment in his own way. I mean, when he's playing golf with his buddies at work, he is very clearly an outsider. He doesn't fit in either. And so through this character, I was able to kind of, at least from my perspective, look at the problems of masculinity in this era as
Right,
well.
right. It's not just females.
That's right. And so, this domestic life, this safe suburban kind of this little house they had when they were living in Pawtucket, it wasn't for him either. I mean, so, but, they both were kind of just allowing themselves to close their eyes to the deeper problems in their marriage, to just,
Right.
because that's what people did. You just kind of got by. So Virgil is perfectly ready to be challenged by his wife on this day because he's been through this himself in his own way.
I loved it. Without giving anything away, I want to talk about the ending, which was both, what you always want endings to be, both inevitable and surprising and perfect. How did you come to that ending? I mean, did you always know that was how it was going to end?
No, I didn't.
Good.
I had a sense that it would actually be a fiction that would be much more, I think, overtly resolved than it is. But Kathleen and Virgil are living in Acropolis Place, which is this really dingy, rundown apartment complex in Newark, Delaware, just outside of Wilmington, Delaware. And it's supposed to be a stopover place, right, for their next home that they're going to buy in Wilmington. And so they are in a literal kind of purgatory in Acropolis Place. This is a liminal space where transformation is possible, and a lot is about to change in their lives after having lived in this place, as you know, Carolyn, from reading the story. But they think that Acropolis Place is going to be for young couples starting out in life, but it's surrounded by elderly folks who live there in their retirement, and so they suddenly are feeling themselves surrounded by decay, by loss, by death. And so all of those forces, that's the escalation of the book. They begin to really make themselves present. And by the end of the novel, Virgil is standing by this darkened pool with his wife in the water, looking up at the lights of the television screens from the other apartment buildings that are surrounding this little kidney-shaped swimming pool. And he's imagining it rising up into space like it's some kind of an aircraft, because suddenly his own reality has become as irrational as this little dog in outer space. And so there's an enormous transformation of the interior, even if I think I can safely say, even if we don't know whether or not Kathleen ever gets out of the swimming pool. Right.
That's exactly right. I want to talk about the cover because the cover is really gorgeous. And as you know, and as all writers out there know, sometimes you don't have total control over a cover. This one is absolutely perfect. Was this how you envisioned the cover? It was how you envisioned it? That's great.
I mean, so I had no idea what they were going to do. I got incredibly lucky. I sent images of women poolside. I sent them sort of color palettes of moods I thought might be interesting. And this is the original art that was returned. It was the first option. It's like a 50s newsprint, and I absolutely love it. I love
it too.
Yeah.
It's great. Were you able to get like a print of it at all? So you can,
it's
beautiful. It's beautiful.
Framed in the house. I know, it's amazing.
So this is a question that I ask, and also all of you out there, if you have questions, don't be shy, put them in the chat and I will ask them. You do have a lot of comments from people. Robin Stell says each and every one of those jobs from your 20s provides fodder for your writing, Jess. Anna Marie Booth said, please repeat that first line. I'm not sure I know what you mean, Anna Marie. Tell us again, and I will have that done. Renee Hershquist says, Jessica, thanks for getting out of the pool to come here. All right. So one of the questions I want to ask is, this is your third book. Do you feel that you learned things from writing other books that you can use for the next one? Or does every project feel brand new? Like, do you feel on your next project that, oh my God, I learned so much from writing the most about character, I'm going to do it again? Or is that even something that you want to do?
I think that what changes, and maybe you can speak to this too, Carolyn, but for me, what changes is just a little bit of a greater sense of confidence in the faith of your
Right.
own subconscious. I mean, every decision, every creative decision that I made while writing this novel, it belongs to this story. And so, the next book that I'm writing has a whole different set of problems to solve, and different people to know. And so I try not to say, oh, in my mind, well, that worked for a previous novel, so I'm going to now apply it to this novel, because it never quite
It never worked.
that way. So but instead, what you feel sitting down is a sense that, like, I've done this before, you can do it again. It's hard every time. The work never gets easier, but you somehow feel less, I think, intimidated by the emptiness of possibility, and you allow yourself to start making decisions. You allow yourself to practice different voices, to find that angle of entry that once you hit it, it's like, you're getting grounded, and that's such an exciting feeling. So I would just say, like, you feel slightly more, like, not a lot more confident, but just like a little more confident that you can maybe write a book, maybe write a novel. But it definitely takes the practice, for sure.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think also you're not derailed as much by those days when everything feels wrong and you can't write. You just know, okay, it's part of the process. We'll move on. We'll work stuff out. Okay, another question I always ask, because I always want to know the answer. What's the worst advice you've ever been given? It doesn't necessarily have to be about writing. It can be about life as well.
The worst advice I've ever been given.
Yeah, people always say best, but I want to know the
I'm gonna say to write what you know is the worst advice that I've been given. I think for me, the art of fiction is the art of discovery. I treat writing a novel much like I would imagine a journalist treats a field subject. I cannot write a compelling story unless I feel personally compelled to understand, what I'm doing, who these people are, what's going to happen. I need to be open to my characters. I need to not know in order to allow themselves to, be revealed to me. And I've written 3 books that take place in wildly different historical periods. And, arguably none of us can really write a great historical novel because we can't possibly know what it was really like. I mean, and maybe I should offer a caveat, not that you can't write a great historical novel. Many people have done that, but you can't write a fully true historical novel. Right. So it has to come to, verisimilitude or an imitation of the truth in its own terms. And so that requires a degree of not knowing and wanting to know. But it's the same principle that I would hold to say that I would never I'm probably not going to write a novel about, a little white girl who grew up in upstate New York with a Latin teacher as a mother, who had an older sister and a basset hound named Clam, that's, and a father who worked as dean of admissions at Colgate University. These are all facts of my life, but I'm probably never going to write that novel. I don't know, maybe I will, but if I sat down to fictionalize my own experience that way, that intimately, it doesn't work. It becomes reportage. It becomes, at least for me, like a kind of essay. And autofiction is a huge genre. Many people do this, and I love it. I really love reading a lot of autofiction. I find it brilliant. But for me, I guess what I'm really drawn to is just the mystery of the thing, like the curiosity of, like, what is it my subconscious could potentially recover to me, what I have the potential to imagine and to dream.
That's great. I love that. I agree with that too. I think write what you know should really be write what you want to know, or write what you're haunted by. I was saying, which brings us to
I love that.
Well, that's true. It's true. You should really, like, I always tell people, if you feel terrified to put something on the page or haunted by it, that's what you should be writing about.
That's right.
That's exactly what you should be writing about. Okay, so my last question, and those of you out there, you still have moments to get questions in. What's obsessing you now and why?
Oh boy. So I spent a month in residence at the Fred W. Smith National Library for the study of George Washington. And
Wow.
so I have been researching the last 3 days of George Washington's life, December 12th through 14th, 1799. And and George Washington, for those who don't know this, died a horrendously grisly,
Yeah,
miserable death.
I know that.
Yeah. And
Tell
so
us.
I've been just riveted by narratives around what actually happened to Washington in those final hours. In particular, the people who were in the room with him, and the immediate aftermath of what happened in Virginia after George Washington passed. So that's what I'm thinking about. I'm trying to understand Washington as a man, as a character. And I'm thinking about him as, not this untouchable,
Right.
chiseled statue who is on our dollar bill, but as a real person, and a person who had like extraordinary, limitations of his own. I guess I've had a habit of chasing the question about male vanity in a lot of my fictions, and Washington is no exception. And so, yeah, that's what I'm looking into, for better, for
Fascinating.
worse. Yeah.
I love history. I absolutely love history. So, just a reminder to everybody out here, this particular session is going to be available forever on a Mighty Blaze YouTube station, so you can watch it whenever you want. I put the handy link up in the chat, so you can go there and rewatch this or tell your friends. I also want to remind you that I put the link up for bookshop.org, so you can go and buy this book, and you should, because it's one of my favorite books of all times, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about it if you want to, as an incentive. I want to thank everybody for being here, and I particularly want to thank Jessica, because this was just wonderful. I'm so happy to have spoken
Thank you
to
so
you,
much for having me. Thank you, Carolyn, and thanks to all who came. Thanks so much.
and we will see you all next time. Thank you. Bye.